I'm a Wario. I'm gonna win.
3, 2, 1, go!
Hello, everyone, and welcome back, and thank you for tuning in with us for another episode of the Retro Achievements Podcast, where we cover a variety of genres, topics, and discuss the bits and bytes of yesteryear. Today, we're diving in on art style within games which have stood the test of time, on a segment I'm calling When Code Becomes Art. Throughout the ages, the toolkit which artists were limited to has become a constant morphing and changing beast. Whether utilizing the limiting blurred nature of old CRT and tube displays to evoke glow and texture, or painstakingly crafting each individual strand of hair so well defined that rendering it takes a week. The artist's creation persists long after the creator is done with it. This is especially so in video games. For exactly that reason, I have my guest here today, Galois, so we can dig on those gems which shine beyond their years, as well as discuss a couple hand-picked sets that have caught our attention for one reason or another. Galois, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm feeling fantastic, feel real better. I feel very excited about this new year of deving, and I'm happy to be back.
Awesome, glad to hear it. Yeah, you actually, speaking of this new year of deving, you just took home that, I believe, Dev of the Year for 2022, no?
Yep, I did. I was awarded by the Discord not too long ago.
Yeah, it's very impressive to see, especially just coming on so recently. Putting out sets like it's, frankly, your job, and I've seen that PS2 list of yours, and it's pretty long. We've got some good stuff to look forward to if you keep it up.
Thank you, and the list is only growing. As several users have said, I'm stuck in the PS2 mines, and I will never be free.
No, and you know what? I'm sorry. Get back to work. You belong in those mines. That being said, what do you think of the topic we got today? You know, art style is one of those things that can kind of be subjective. There's a lot of things that people can work with. Kind of like I read in the intro there, you know, starting back in the NES days, you didn't really work a lot on art. You just were limited by, I have 8 bits, I have 8 colors. Maybe I can use transparency as something to help me along. But as you progressed, you would get dithering with those CRT TVs to try and evoke that blur. Sometimes people would skip that entirely. So I think a GameCube with Wind Waker is one of those things where they said, hey, we're going cel-shaded. We just got this system where we put out a tech demo and had some fantastic Legend of Zelda display going on, but nope, psych, rug pull, Wind Waker. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up Wind Waker, because that was actually the first game I was going to talk about.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
And
yeah,
and there's something really cool. Well, first I want to talk about the way that devs deal with, specifically the art teams of video games, when they deal with the graphics of the game. When they're presenting their game, they have one way they're presenting it, and they have one way that they're looking at it. So the CRTs at home will present an entirely different way to what they are actually making, you know, on their computers. Back in the 80s and 90s, they had specific CRT monitors for businesses, and you'll see a lot, like if you're in any Smash Bros. Melee groups, you'll see people talking about like the old CRTs that were in airports. Because I couldn't tell you the exact science, because I'm new to the collecting CRTs myself and understanding.
This is all news to me, so please go on.
Yeah, it's something with like you were talking about with the tubes earlier. It's something with how
like cathode rays or something of that nature.
It's like these business class CRTs display not only at a higher refresh rate, but also brighter with more vibrant colors. So
I mean, it makes sense, especially when you bring up the airport thing. Those kind of industries, those companies are going to have large bucks to shell out displays that need to be remaining on constantly.
Exactly.
And back in the day, those displays would heat up. So I imagine those components were stronger, more durable, probably an all-around result.
Way more expensive, too.
Yeah, and the average user is not going to have access to that. You're right.
And I'll talk about more about 16-bit gaming in a sec, but the jump from 64 to then the GameCube, which I forget how many, you know, quote unquote bits it renders at.
Sure.
But it's
at that point it just goes to polygons as far as I'm concerned.
It's a crazy jump in terms of graphics, especially if you look at the first game on the GameCube, like a launch title, is Luigi's Mansion. Compare that to Mario 64 and just how everything is rendered. And that's a good one to talk about too, Luigi's Mansion, with the textures and everything. But you know, the GameCube is a powerful console. You know, people make fun of Nintendo now for having weaker consoles, but the GameCube is pretty damn strong. And
They came out swinging in that generation, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a shame that the library is kind of, I don't want to say weak, because the library is super strong when you look at the good titles, but it just didn't have a lot of support compared to the other two, Xbox
I would say
and
it's
PS2.
dense.
Yeah.
I'd say the library is very dense. There's quality there, but you're like, it is sparse, and just like you said, third-party content just completely lacking.
Exactly. And, it's interesting that you brought the tech demo for, what would eventually become Wind Waker, because at that point they were experimenting with how to transition Ocarina of Time's art style into 3D. And
right.
it's really, first of all, Ocarina of Time is a beautiful game in its concept art. When you actually play the game, you're like, 64, it looks, it looks very dated. That transition was really awkward for that tech demo, and they did not like it whatsoever. No. And the average consumer loved it because it was more Zelda. But when the art team is looking at it, it just didn't feel like the next gen step up. It looked like a commercial you would see for a 64 game. And I mean, it's really just supposed to show how cool the GameCube is, but they were like, we need to do something else. And
it still wasn't something they wanted to represent their beloved IP with.
Exactly. And they spent a lot of time thinking about it. And Miyamoto started Zelda off with this little cute art style. Like, Link had a big nose, brown hair. He wore a tunic with no pants. This. Like,
the manual drawing, the original. Yeah.
And Wind Waker is a callback to those days because, the more you play, like the Ocarina of Time was the big one. It was the absolute, monumental game for its era. And people loved like the adult things that were going on. Well, they were like, well, let's take a step in a different direction. And not a lot of people liked it, which, as a Zelda fan, who Wind Waker was basically my first one, I don't understand the viewpoint. Maybe it's because Twilight Princess came a couple years later. But for me, like, Wind Waker is one of the best looking games I've ever played.
So I cut my teeth on just a peek behind the scenes. I got gifted an NES just as like a, hey, I'm not interested in this. It wasn't like a Christmas gift or a birthday gift. It was literally just I was at a relative's house who's like, I'm done with this. Here you go. Here's a pile of games. Go nuts. So went home, and the original Zelda was my first experience with that, coupled with this relative's hand-drawn maps of like how to navigate the Lost Woods, how to get up Death Mountain, how to get the different rings of power and this kind of thing. So I really got an experience that was a little bit beyond my years, and it allowed me to progress naturally through the Zeldas. He also had Zelda 2, which I was given along with his stash of games. Didn't spend nearly a quarter of the time in that game as I did with the first one. But what I did learn from just those two entries, and shortly thereafter stepping into the SNES entry, Link to the Past, it seems that with each iteration of Zelda, what Nintendo likes to do is really take a look at drastically changing the formula. Yep. Now, that doesn't mean boss mechanics. That doesn't mean, finding the big chest and the valuable item or anything. I'm talking about its presentation, its aesthetic, and its visual draw.
Yep.
Which, I mean, frankly, is perfect for the topic we've got today. So please go on.
So yeah, and like you said, with each one they upgrade pretty much, and you can, on the site, on the Retro Achievement site, I'm part of the art team.
Good
and
deal.
One of my biggest things is that people don't like box art crops, but I absolutely love video game box art. And
I would put box art in the same vein as manual crops. Any art that would be found in the manual, and as we just talked about, that was the best depiction of Link that you were going to get at the time. You had a better quality drawing of what the representation was supposed to look like over the 8-bit depiction of blocks. So,
yeah.
Yes, 100% I sign off on box art. I'm a big
advocate for that, because the Zelda box art, even when it's just like the shield, it just looks fantastic. And it's very clear that they want to showcase the differences in style and presentation, like you said, with each game. And Wind Waker is such a drastic change from what people were expecting, especially with that tech demo, which honestly, like looking back, it was cool, but probably a bad idea to showcase an IP like that. Would have been better for like Mario.
That is most likely where all the hate came from.
Exactly.
Felt like they got duped.
But like the way cell shading works, and why this particular is timeless, is because you're not expecting realism. And I think that's really important for this era of video games to stay timeless with, is if you go in expecting realism now, like, you know, people play games like The Last of Us 2, where the artists, God bless them, had to actually see real depictions of gore in order to accurately represent what it would look like if you shoot a zombie or a real person in that game. But in Wind Waker, you go in and the first thing you see is this cartoony, colorful world with
Yes, can I get an accurate depiction of what it's like to destroy a moblin, please?
Exactly. But like, because everything is, you know, the ocean, if you think of Wind Waker and you think the ocean, you think of white and one color blue. And you don't need any more than that. And that was the beauty, was that it was so simple that for starters, the game runs great because it doesn't have to be that graphically intense. So they were able to use a couple more techniques in presenting it. They have a bit of a draw distance technique that I really, really enjoy. If you're on the ocean and you're just, and this is on the GameCube release, not the HD, which I'll talk about in a sec.
Sure.
But if you're on the ocean and you see an island in the distance, it will be fuzzy. That's not your TV. That is the game rendering it.
Right.
At a smaller distance, specifically, and
knowing that you're that far out.
Exactly. Yeah. And it just looks so damn good. And it holds up perfectly.
I'd also say that the ocean uses a fantastic job of utilizing motion to make itself feel animated rather than shading.
That too.
So they can go with that uniform blue, and they have, like you said, that white, the waves cresting through is what gives it that actual wide breadth feeling.
Yeah, and
it does just as well.
That's one thing I loved doing as a kid was jumping over in the white, you know, trying to land a boat in the white waves. But you know, if you move on from just the depiction of the ocean, which you're going to be seeing 90% of the game, the islands are beautiful, and it's really weird for me to talk about out loud because most of these thoughts are just internal. But textures in video games are really important for the presentation, because if a texture looks like crap, you're going to notice first thing.
Your eyes are almost drawn to it.
Exactly. And in Wind Waker, because it's so stylized and cartoony and colorful, and it blends in with itself, I guess, if that makes sense.
No, you're completely on the money.
No texture sticks out like a sore thumb unless they want you to notice it, like if it's a symbol on a wall or something. Everything fits exactly with its environment. Like when you see a blade of grass, you're not taken aback by that blade of grass being a 2D, you know, image layered on to look 3D with other 2D images layered with it to present grass.
What you're saying is exactly why Team Fortress 2 is still as popular as it is today.
Yes.
Yeah, it still uses that same kind of art style. I don't think it quite qualifies as cel-shaded, per se.
I think it does. That was, in the early days, it had the whole shading engine like Wind Waker has.
Gotcha. Well, exactly for that reason, though, those textures do not pop unless they are intended to pop,
Exactly.
Just like you said.
And you know, with the we were talking about realism earlier, and TF2 is a great example of that. When you launch the game, you see these cartoony characters first thing, and they never really get old. And mostly that also, you know, helps with their personalities. You never forget their personalities. But because they're not trying to depict what a real human looks like, and they're not trying as hard, your brain doesn't have to work as hard to understand that it's not real. Like, you look at it and you say it's fake.
Furthermore, they aren't constrained to their era.
Exactly.
You know, if you were to look back and say, oh, this game from 2007 that tried to be realistic, it's going to look like dog shit.
Yeah, and some of your favorite games on PS2 are like that too. Like, you know, I love Silent Hill 2, but
they swung for the fences. They did.
For what, 2004? Oh my god, it's mind-blowing. And even today, some of the rendering that they do in that game is mind-blowing. But some of the
atmosphere still exists.
Oh, exactly.
It'll still elicit that creepy feel, but I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah,
please.
It's the faces are, you know, a lot of people use this phrase now because of memes, but uncanny valley, and that just means that it looks, for your brain, it looks close enough to be human, but it's not. And because it's not, and you recognize that it's not,
yeah,
a
you
real
can tell
human,
it's attempting to, and you don't like that attempt.
Your brain is like, I don't like this. It feels like something is trying to play a trick on me. It's some primordial thing that we have, like, you know, that we're afraid of, like when we see faces in bushes. So yeah, cell shading really doesn't get dated because of that, and it really helps, you know, both the presentation for both TF2 and Wind Waker because both are presenting themselves as this cartoony, light-hearted romp versus, anything that's trying to be ultra mega serious. And it's just so perfect. If you've never played Wind Waker, it takes itself seriously, but it eases up at the same time, so you can enjoy what's essentially like riding a wave. You got your ups and downs and your happy moments. Yeah, and the game this is probably the funniest thing about Wind Waker is that the game can be scary. Do you remember the Earth Temple?
Not off the top of my head for being spooky.
Well, it's full of re-deads.
Sure.
And I know you know what a re-dead is, right?
Absolutely.
So in Ocarina of Time, a re-dead is like, imagine...
They definitely spooked me in that game.
The mummified corpse, which they say isn't really a corpse, but it's a brown-skinned, ugly-looking corpse with a mask. Yeah. And in Wind Waker, they make it even creepier. It's like this weird, hunched-over creature with this huge oblong head and huge ears and these red beady eyes, and they scream at you. That is a scary thing to see as a kid. Guys? Yeah, I find them more frightening than the Ocarina of Time ones, and even stuff from Twilight Princess I find scary. Just because like you take this cute game and then they just drop this in there. Oh my god, that scares the crap out of me. I was not expecting it to scare me.
Okay, I remember these guys, and I'm sorry, they still don't terrify me. All I remember about them is their hoop earrings.
I think it's just because from when I saw them as a kid, because it was just timing. It was just like, you see all these cute monsters, and then boom, here's a re-dead screeching at you. That was terrifying. But I think that again shows how it doesn't have to be entirely graphic or bloody or realistic to give you the atmosphere it wants. And TF2 does the same thing, but it wants to be gory and graphic and funny. So when a character dies and they blow up, you see like the cartoon bone sticking out of the joints and stuff like that, Right. They play up completely to their...
They lean into their art style.
Yep. Not only to their limitations, but also to... Like, they knew exactly what they were going for, especially for TF2, which went from a realism look with Team Fortress Classic.
Well, even in I don't know if it was beta, but in the pre-development of TF2, they were still chasing down that realistic style.
Yeah, the guns were like, they looked realistic, which is really weird to look back on, because you look at the guns now and you see like the soda popper and you're like, what is this?
No, I'm saying like before it was even released, they were full on making like another military simulation kind of style game, and thank God they pulled the plug on that, because we wouldn't be talking about it today.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And you can pull off games that try to be realistic but kind of stay in their lane, if that makes sense. Like, and some companies really looked out with classics. Like, Silent Hill 2 probably isn't the best to look back on and say those are good facial features, but Half-Life.
The atmosphere art style holds up. I would say Silent Hill holds up through the atmosphere.
Completely, yeah.
The tone.
The music, the voice acting, no matter how
that's
cheesy.
Oh God. That's something we, shouldn't overlook in our discussions here. Is art is not just a visual component.
Exactly.
Music is art. Direction is art. Writing is art. It really comes down to how all these things play together in one cohesive story. Admittedly, my first game that I'm leaning towards is more eye candy. More so that it still holds up today. Not saying that Wind Waker doesn't, but you can definitely tell, okay, this isn't something that was made recently.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe more so if you play on the original GameCube, but my first game that I'm bringing to the table is Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
Oh, great choice.
Yes. Now, I think that is probably the epitome of pixel perfection. When people want to talk about hand-drawn pixel art and just quality animations, there's no stretch, there's no blur. If you have the Hulk spinning around in a 360, well, buckle up, motherfucker. You're going to have to do a lot of pixel editing. And you got that in these games. If you plop down somebody on the Dreamcast version today, and you told, maybe they didn't have any idea who these characters were, they'd have to be somebody completely removed from popular culture. But I'm convinced that you could get them believing that was a recent release, just off visual appeal alone. The mechanics hold up, the music holds up, the pixel art is the defining of what it means to be good pixel art, in my opinion. Have you had an experience with this game?
Yeah, I love Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And, we talked about it before, but I love looking at, because since I'm on the art team, I do this anyway, but I look at the assets for a video game first thing when I'm interested in it.
Sure.
And the concept art, if I could remember the artist who does it, I would be great right
Name
now.
dropping, right?
But
sure.
The concept art alone for Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is beautiful because it's this great mix of anime yet bringing in the comic features. You know, like you see Spider-Man and he looks like he pops off a comic page, but then you see Jill Valentine, you know, and you're like, oh, she looks just like she's coming from Resident Evil concept art. It's perfect. I love it.
Exactly. No, they do such a good job of having everybody's style meet just in the middle. Everyone still retains their own flavor from the respective series, but obviously you can't have, you know, somebody from a completely differently drawn animated game meet. These worlds will conflict, is what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah.
they did a fantastic job of kind of blending everybody together in this still very appealing and representing each character very well.
And this is in 2D.
Yes. Oh my God. That's a thing. These are pixel art. Like, this is pixel art. The stages are gorgeous. Every character has some kind of jump, crouch, dash, several different moves, supers. If you haven't played this game, it's extensively deep when it comes to mechanics, and you would think, okay, if they're going to do that, surely with all these moving parts and moving pieces, somewhere they have to phone it in the art department. Surely they can't have somebody, you know, drawing each frame of this. But that's exactly what happens. It gets done.
Yeah, and that's a really good example of a game that's timeless from every corner that you look at it. Every single thing. I mean, the music, the art direction, the gameplay. And,
For sure.
you know, I think everybody once in their life has heard, you know, want to take you for a ride.
I heard the hesitation. You thought about going for it. You thought about actually singing it for a second.
I did. But I won't bless these listeners with my horrible voice.
Maybe next time. But yeah, I would be lying if I hadn't had it in my head almost the entire time I was talking about the game.
I mean, it's just that good. When a game can stick to you like glue like that and leave you with a dumb smile, you know it's good.
For sure. It does have a set on RA for the Dreamcast version. It's coming in at 149 achievements, 825 points. The game itself came out February 2000, so a little bit dated. The Dreamcast didn't get a lot of love when it comes to development hours, it seems, on the site. There's still a good amount of games in the catalog there waiting to be touched on, waiting to be developed for. I think there's just a lot of excitement around PS2, and hey, why wouldn't there be? But yeah, I think at some point people will start looking back and revisiting things like PSP, Dreamcast, and seeing what else there is. I only bring that up because this is far from the only Dreamcast game that was visually impressive.
Yeah, there's a ton.
It would be one of the reasons, ultimately, that sank Sega's Battleship. It was simply too expensive to develop for this console. The investment cost was steep. Getting involved was a high gamble, and frankly, if you didn't get involved, you won that gamble because they aren't around anymore to be a console developer, and that's terrible to say.
And it sucks because the Dreamcast is also not a lame console. It's a powerful system. It can run a lot of. I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff on PS2 and GameCube that was also on Dreamcast. Sonic Adventure, for instance.
Absolutely.
They did not do much to port it to GameCube other than make it work for the GameCube. I believe it plays the exact same. I'm not the biggest Sonic Adventure nerd, but I've played both versions, and I remember them both being pretty similar. And
it seems to be Sega's only crime here was swinging 10 to 12 months too early.
Pretty much, yeah. That that was kind of their staple for a hot minute. They did that with a lot of consoles. You know, they milked
Absolutely.
the Genesis dry, and then the Saturn launch. I mean, shoot, we only have that's another Sega system on the site that doesn't have a lot of sets, is the Saturn. We'd like to see love to both of those.
And I think they were limping through that console generation so
definitely.
much that they're like, let's just get to Dreamcast, go. And that was the nail in the coffin. But it doesn't take away from the fact that it was a very good powerhouse for visuals and art direction. That's, I think, a lot of the library holds up.
Yeah, and you know, my second game that I developed, actually Dreamcast being on the site brought me back to be to continue junior developing. There's a port of one of my favorite games on PS2, Federation versus Xeon Deluxe. Although the Dreamcast version isn't the deluxe version; it's a Gundam game, and it runs really well on Dreamcast. It's missing a lot of the content that the PS2 version has, but when I was playing it and developing a set for it, I'm like, this is the same game. And that's amazing because I know the PS2 is its own powerhouse in different ways. But, I didn't grow up with the Dreamcast. They're very rare. I played one at my friend's house, but, actually developing, a set for a game and sitting down and playing it, I'm like, this is the same thing. And that's pretty damn impressive that they were able to do that, even though they had such a short time frame. And some games, one game that everybody talks about with Sega and the Dreamcast is Shenmue.
Oh, yeah.
I don't, since we're talking about things that hold up and timeless art styles, Shenmue is one of those things that, like, holy crap, it blows
does not,
minds.
I'm sorry.
It doesn't, no. It was absolutely phenomenal for the era, and it's just one of those games that would blow people away. It's like just a mind-numbing experience when you look at it. You're like, it just looks fantastic when you're in 2004, and then you look at it now and you're like, oh man, them textures, bro.
Exactly, and that's the price you pay if you shoot for realism.
Exactly.
You run the risk of locking yourself into a couple year frame window there of relevancy. Not to say that people don't still talk about Shenmue, but there's a reason that it's getting a re-release here.
Exactly.
If it hasn't already, I can't remember. But they're talking about it. Kind of to wrap back into the pixel art of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, another entry that gets talked about a lot that I don't want to overlook, and it isn't one of my games, but just another one that gets brought to the table when talking about pixel art, Symphony of the Night.
Oh, that was my game.
No!
That's perfect. That's perfect.
All right, I mean, that, I guess, segues us into the second one.
What am I fighting for?
What have I got?
All right, guys, so we are moving into our second game. Fortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, stumbled completely happenstance into Gala's next pick. Please, take it away.
So, I suppose I should say our next pick.
Yes, definitely.
Is Symphony of the Night for the PlayStation 1 and Dreamcast, or Saturn, Sega Saturn, and then ported later on to PSP and PS4.
Countless others, yeah.
This is, when I think of video game art, this is probably number one in terms of pure artistic talent I see on screen. And, let me talk about the history of Castlevania first. The start of the series is rooted in gothic horror and your hammer and horror movies, Dracula, obviously, Frankenstein, the creature from the Black Lagoon, all these different, gothic horror, buttresses of churches, dark ambience, stuff like that. And the games reflect that with all the color palettes being orange and dark blues. The more that you progress in the Castlevania timeline of games on release, the darker the games get in terms of palette. It's really interesting to go from the first game to the second, because the second game is really ugly. Because they're like, we need to get darker and make it more horror.
And we're still working with the NES, no less. So, like, exactly. How do we do that?
The third game, they brighten it back up, and the main thing they go for is orange, because they go for contrasting colors.
Yes.
And that really works with orange and blue because it looks kind of otherworldly. So
no, this third, not to cut you off, that third entry was my first taste of Castlevania. That came in the aforementioned pile of games that was given to me along with this relative's NES. Castlevania 3, as well as seared into my brain, is an old picture early 90s pamphlet with the food pyramid on it. But beneath that pamphlet pyramid was scrawlings of passwords.
Oh,
and man, that was worth its weight in gold.
That's right.
Please, go on.
So, when you're progressing from 8-bit to then 16-bit, and I think the PS1 is 32-bit in its pixel presentation. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
I don't know.
But
go ahead.
For starters,
enough to argue.
The color palette explodes, and they absolutely revel in it. Every PS1 game that I can think of looks different from another, and it's very clear that they knew what they were doing entirely with the art direction. First of all, it starts off in this beautiful hallway where you've got your grays, your red carpets. It's not muted colors anymore, and they're not limited by this tiny palette that has to be repeated. With repeating textures, they go all out. characters are outlined specifically. Alucard, when he dashes, when he's got specific equipment on, leaves an after image. That's the coolest shit I've ever seen in my life.
This game is 100% a passion project. I want to draw attention to the fact that this is just a series that I absolutely love through and through. It's an IP that I will eat up 9 ways to Sunday. I don't care if you give me, I want the pachinko machine. Fuck it, put it in my living room. But something I want to draw attention to is at the time that they were pouring their hearts into this game.
Oh yeah.
Another part of Castlevania team was also developing those N64 entries, trying to get their first steps into the 3D realm. Igarashi and his team knew that they were going to be steering this pixel wheelhouse, and the other team with N64 still being so fresh, somebody had to try and take it in that direction. And there's a reason, again, we are talking about this entry and not Castlevania 64 or its werewolf sequel.
Exactly. And it does a perfect job of understanding. We keep I keep saying it, understanding the limitations of what they're working with. And it's clear that they understood that timelessness in an art style can be kept by 2D elements throughout. The way Symphony of the Night does 3D effects is really interesting because it's like a puppet. If you can think of the boss that starts with a G, I always forget his name. He's in the reverse castle. Galamoth.
Is it the big hanging guy with many body parts?
He can count too. That's Beelzebub, I think. He's puppeteered, it seems. He's got his hand sprite on the top layer, then below that is his forearm, and then below that is his upper arm, and then his torso is below that. A
paper doll to it almost.
Yeah, and if you were to take that and change it into 3D, it will look so much worse. And it, like you said with the other Castlevania entries on 64 in that era, they just don't translate well. And that's just the growing pains of the console. But
there's a reason why the 3D only seriously appears in earnest. Not this paper doll 3D, but true 3D is in the save room. And it's just for that brief rotating orb thing that explodes into the coffin and comes back together.
What was up with that?
Fun with it.
That's the coolest thing ever.
It was a very neat transition, but they just needed to buy a little time.
It's literally a save room, and they went crazy on it. That shows you how much they cared for the presentation.
I would agree.
And we were talking about CRT displays earlier, and with pixel art, you have to.
Oh man.
Yeah, you have to stretch your mind with pixel art, especially when working on old games. So when I was talking about the display of old CRTs and for the business class, for actual game developers and whatnot,
sure.
What they were looking at was not the same thing we are looking at, but they understood that it would translate into something else. So I can't pull up a visual like we have a video going, but a picture of Dracula's headshot from this game.
With the red eyes.
If you look at it, just the sprite, you see that his eyes are 2 red pixels. Just a single pixels in the middle of his eyes.
Yep.
And they're just dots. The rest of him, it looks great from a distance, but when you look at it just as the sprite form on your computer screen or an LCD screen, it looks like it was pieced together like, perler beads. It doesn't look like it blends together. But if you look at it with even a CRT filter, but on a CRT, it blends together. The colors start to mesh. That single red pixel for his eye turns into the entire eye. So it looks
has
like
a
he's
bleeding
got
glow to it.
Exactly. And that glow, because that center red, it bleeds into those pixels beside of it, making them glow a little bit red, making it look like his eyes are entirely red. That effect was not on their screen. They did not see that. They had to translate it. They understood that it would look a certain way on that screen, and it just pops.
It's like somebody who would be painting with watercolor and understands the bleed.
Exactly.
It's no different. And I don't think there's a better example of that dithering being put to use than Symphony of the Night.
Mm-hmm.
It's what really made that game on the PS1 pop. It's why I talked about Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and referred to pixel art at the epitome in that entry, because they weren't necessarily going for that blur so much. That was still on CRT days, but they definitely had a more comical art feel that they were going for, let's say.
And arcade machines actually have different displays that have them display something differently. So I know I've actually played a Marvel vs. Capcom 2 arcade cabinet. and
I imagine it's very crisp.
oh my gosh, it's beautiful. The colors are exploding, and it's interesting that those CRTs are different from your commercial ones specifically because they're made for gaming, so they have a higher refresh rate, and that's something a lot of gamers don't take into account, especially with old games. But if it chugs with a low refresh rate, oh, you're gonna notice.
Definitely.
And you're gonna especially notice if it's upgraded into a nicer one. The CRT monitors you see in like an old 90s movie, like at a computer screen, like in Jurassic Park, that thing has a better refresh rate than the monitor that I bet 85% of our listeners have right now.
It's because it was designed for it, and
Exactly.
I would 100% agree, and you get different visuals because of it. Now, stepping a little bit outside of the game art, but still definitely tied to the game, there's an artist with Castlevania. Well, she is independent. Her name is Ayami Kojima.
Yes.
She is known for that not watercolor, that Renaissance style painting. If you've ever seen those flowing portrait representations of Dracula, or just the gorgeous pale Alucard kind of looking regal porcelain.
It's literally beautiful.
Yeah, it is 100%. She's responsible for that art style, and that's one of those things that I think hold up regardless of time as well. If you had one of these portraits done up in a full size on a canvas, you could make the argument that you got it completely separate from even knowing about the game. You could explain to people that it has nothing to do with a video game.
Yeah.
She's been commissioned for projects outside of Castlevania. I know one of my friends bought me a Magic the Gathering card, where one of the vampire characters in that game was done up in her style by her. So that's cool. It's signed by her, and it's just one of those things that, again, the love you put into the art direction and the art style of a game will help it stand the test of time. And if you misstep and go for realism, you're setting a trap for yourself 2 years down the road.
Agreed. And it's funny that we talk about her, because if I turn my head slightly to the left, I see
this room of posters. Damn it, this room of posters.
I see a Castlevania Lament of Innocence poster. And it's a picture.
He's staring up.
Yeah, it's a picture of Leon Belmont holding the whip, and in the background is Matthew holding his wife. Oh my god.
She has this masterful use of lighting. Because if I'm not looking at it right now, but if I remember, it's kind of almost like a small spotlight on his face.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And the rest of his clothes are illuminated because of it. The scene is kind of dark and muted. It has an almost like pale blue tint to it. Fantastic art direction.
Now, what's interesting about this art style is that it translates incredibly well to Gothic, specifically because when you think of Gothic art, you're thinking of pale people, you're thinking of dark, muted colors. Well, in Castlevania, that's what it's all about. It's all about dark, muted colors and pale people. So for Symphony of the Night, they didn't. Two of the main characters, two cast members are vampires. Dracula and Alucard.
Right.
Spoilers, I guess. And when they're creating the sprite, they don't have to worry about, I think they're too pale. Is their skin tone right? No, they're vampires, so they can go a little more.
Pour on the alabaster.
Crazier with the colors. Yeah. And I've actually got because I love pixel art so much, I use perler beads to they're these little plastic beads that have a hole in the middle that you could put down on pegs, then iron together.
They melt together a little bit.
Yeah. You've definitely seen art of them on
like
a convention floor or whatever, but I've got a sprite of Alucard standing right now, just with his left foot behind his right foot heel, and he's just got his shoulders hunched. It is such a beautiful sprite, and it's only a couple inches tall on your screen, and it's made of completely different pixels, but the presentation for just the sprite work on itself and the animation, when I think of Symphony of the Night and you think of Alucard,
he has that bounce to him.
Yeah, that he has the Castlevania gait walk, where he's got his hands, forward and like that. And then, one of my favorite things is the jumping back, when you press triangle and he does that back motion. I've got that seared into my brain. The way the cape just flows.
Another great use, completely different realm of development, completely different realm of art styles. But just like I was arguing that the ocean in Wind Waker got so much use of motion, or so much use out of motion, the cape and the pixels here do such a good job of eliciting motion that they get use out of it themselves. It's the backdash that you're talking of. I can't imagine how long it took just to make it feel as satisfying as it does.
That's the hardest part about animation. And I haven't worked on animation myself other than just goofing around. But I've got friends who work and have gone to college and have degrees in animation. And it's insane to think about. First of all, like when you throw a punch in real life, you're not thinking about, unless you're a boxer, you're not thinking about your form.
Right.
You're just moving your fist. But when you're animating, you have to think about the muscle moving up. You have to think about the forearm stretching and twisting. You have to think about the fists, tightening up and loosening once it comes back from the punch. It's insane to how much work that goes in. And this is just an animation for stepping back and having your cape flip up a little bit.
Right. And it does come down to understanding anatomy. Exactly like you're saying. Where does this figure's weight go when they make this movement? How does their foot get planted when they adjust themselves this way? Thankfully, they have a little bit of leeway. It is still a PS1 pixel game, and, at the end of the day, they have the excuse of he's a vampire. So if he slides a little too smooth, yeah, he's a vampire.
Or if he stands weird, or when he punches, he does it in this really weird way with his left arm up and his feet kind of spread out awkward.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's there's points where they're showing you what you're doing for, a sense of you're doing this action, you need to understand, and then a sense of we are presenting this action.
This goes back to kind of what we were talking about previously, though, just in a different form. If you devote yourself to realism too much, you sacrifice quality.
Uh-huh.
And this wouldn't be a visual realism. This would just be, well, that's not how the body moves.
Yeah, and for early games that go into 3D, it's so hard, especially if you're limited by polygon models.
Tomb Raider.
To translate that well. Yes, that is exactly what I was going to talk about. That and poor old Metal Gear Solid 1. It's incredibly hard to translate, Lara Croft she had it way worse than Snake in regards of you had to jump. You had to platform. Yeah, and also, everyone talks about it, her chest. It's hilarious when you look back on it. It is literally two pyramids.
It's one of those things where you go, okay, yeah, it's funny, but, well, what else did you really have to do? It was one of the early PS1 entries, and I don't think you could design a curve without...
Nope. Nope, you couldn't do it. Now, for Metal Gear, it's a very good-looking game because it doesn't... when you look at the faces, they're not trying incredibly hard.
There was a style they were going for. The shaded hair.
Yeah.
I believe the bandana on Snake almost was an excuse to just be like, well, we don't have to do a third of it and most of his eyes.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look at his eyes, they're not actual shaded in eye. I think most characters don't have what you would define as having like an eye shape. It's instead their eyebrows and their forehead,
it's implied.
And it kind of shades downward. Yeah. And that is actually a perfect translation of the art style. If I could remember an artist's name off the top of my head, I'd be golden. But I do have a poster of Metal Gear Solid 2 on my wall. And this for history of Metal Gear Solid 2 real quick. When they were announcing and showcasing this game, they didn't have writing on any promotional material. It was all Snake. So the poster on my wall is art from the same artist who did the art for Metal Gear Solid 1. And this artist does a lot with the color black. So on Snake's face, to define the shape of his cheekbones, he just has an entire area shaded black to show that hard cut. And the first game translates that really well into the faces because it does look like it was taken off of a picture and then pixelated.
I don't know if it's quite in the realm of using your negative space. I don't know if that's how you would define it, but he does that block out style, like you're saying.
Yeah. The rest of the game, the only reason why it suffers is because of the jitters and just the problem with 3D. That game's textures are actually incredible in regards to what they're supposed to be. Like, I can clearly remember the box. I can clearly remember how the snow looked like, and it doesn't look bad. No,
it definitely is a product of its time, but they this was not their first rodeo with the PS1's engines and hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes to show.
You can tell that they said this is how we're going to have to get it to look good because Kojima is all about
film
presentation. Yeah. And that was his main thing too. If you play the game, it's filmed like an actual movie. And with the shots and everything, but what
is it? Tactical espionage action is like the subline or something.
Yeah. So they play up to their strengths and their weaknesses. Okay, so for instance, let's compare the scene where, spoilers, I suppose,
At this rate,
Ocelot gets his arm cut
Yep,
off.
yep.
You know, with that scene on the PlayStation 1, it looks awesome.
Absolutely.
You got Gray Fox coming in with a sword, which, by the way, has an after image. Thank you, Konami, for pushing the after effect.
Which is
on
sick
PlayStation.
as hell.
It's awesome. So he comes in, he slices off, Ocelot's hand, and then all you see is just this political forearm, and then the spray.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you go back and play the Twin Snakes on GameCube, and we were talking about the GameCube earlier and art styles, and if you go back and play that game, it's so much uglier than the
They
PSX
tried to lean
version.
in towards realism.
Exactly, and they did not play up to the art style at all, which was what the first game did, because they had the concept art first before they actually created the rest of the visual presentation, and you can really see it, especially in their faces. And it's funny because when you go to other games in the series, you can tell where there was definitely a stepping stool, if that makes sense. If you go from Metal Gear Twin Snakes, and then Metal Gear Solid 2, you can definitely see the jump in quality.
Absolutely.
But then once you go from 2 to 3, you can see it even more.
It's astounding.
Yeah, and 3 it's not one of the games I want to talk about, but that's a game that I go back to a lot. I haven't mastered it yet for retro achievements. I did work on the set. You should definitely play the set. It's very long and challenging, but is a fun
It does the
challenge,
game
especially
justice.
for Metal Gear fans.
It absolutely does the game
complete justice.
I believe it was Will Height that got that dubbed. Yeah.
He did most of the work. I literally did the Ape Escape achievements and the badges and the names. But I was there for concept creation, and some of the achievements are mine. The slug one, or the parasite one where a leech sticks to you. That's my idea.
There you go.
So I hope you guys enjoy that. But if you go back and replay that game, it might be blind nostalgia for me. But as someone who looks at a game from, I don't want to call myself an artist, but from like at least an artistic point of view, it is a beautiful game. I think it's because it's on Kojima's last step for understanding, how to get facial rigs to work properly. The lip sync stinks. I mean, you can really tell it in the headcanon that I have, it's because they're speaking Russian to each other. But if you look at the lip sync, it's not good.
That's your Band-Aid on it to make it a little bit better.
Pretty much, but the faces look great, and it's weird for me to describe because it's leaning into realism, but then again, it's not. First of all, the game is insane, so your idea of realism is thrown out the window when you meet a guy who's covered in scars and vomits out bees.
So the face gets brought to mind, sorry to cut you off there, but the face that gets called to mind when you think of that leaning into realism, but not quite, is the end. That amount of wrinkles and that amount of just old, especially when he bugs his eyes out and has that full on. They knew what they were. Great. Yeah, it does. That you're doing is exactly what they were going for, and I think they would be happy to hear you a little bit grossed. That leans away from the realism and back to, like you said initially, where Ocelot gets his arm cut off in that PS1 entry. They leaned back into their style, and that is part of why 3 is such a big hit.
Now, there is something interesting to know that they took the same lean on art style and transitioned that into the PS4 Metal Gear Solid 4 on the PS3. And in my opinion, it does not look great. Okay, well, let's talk about the textures and the models. Those by themselves look fantastic. Seeing Snake smoke a cigarette and having the smoke blow out.
Absolutely.
Or like the sunlight gleam, that looks great. But when I look at these characters, they do not look like their older characters. They don't look like their art at all. The only character that really sticks out that looks the same is Colonel Campbell. You only have a couple shots of his face. It doesn't feel like they took a lot of time to care about it. But let me ask you this. Did you play Metal Gear Solid 2?
No, I did not, unfortunately.
Okay. There's a character named Rose in that game. And I forget the age at which she's supposed to be, but probably late 20s, early 30s.
All right.
If you play Metal Gear Solid 4, I believe it's only a handful of years after 2. She does not look like she's early 30s. She looks like she's early 40s, mid 40s. It's not.
Hey man, war is hard. War's hell on you.
Yeah, that's true. But she's not in a war. She's out. But I guess that could be a good.
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
But
There's no way.
But she doesn't even look like her. With Snake, you can they do a really funny thing where they've got face camo that you can put on to make yourself look like young Snake. from Metal Gear Solid 2 and the first game. And they even have the sprite head of the first game.
Oh, yeah. I played a lot of that in.
So when you look at his young Snake face, it translates well. And then when you go from the young Snake to the old Snake, I'm sure people have seen the gif of Snake, going young, flipping out the cigarette, and then just turning old immediately with the mustache.
Absolutely.
That he does not look bad. He looks like he was translated well from the art. He looks different, but not terrible.
And I mean, furthermore, if you're familiar with the story, he shouldn't be aging great.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've already kind of put together those pieces together that he's definitely not gonna look the same. But returning characters, they just don't look right. I don't know. And it's interesting too when they translate even further into Metal Gear Solid 5. And I'll go out and I might put myself out on a pike, for everybody to kill me. I am not a fan of that game. I enjoy.
Well, everyone, this has been the Retro Achievements Podcast. No, good Lord.
I enjoy Metal Gear in all of its forms, but it's just a weak entry for me. I had fun with it, but I don't.
Was it the open world aspect of it?
I think so. Yeah. And here's a really interesting thing. This leads perfect to what I was going to talk about. Talking about the open world is that it's boring to look at. It's entirely boring to look at. When you go to Mother Base, what do you see? You see the same color walls, which you can change. Okay. You see the same concrete flooring. You see the same colors on your buildings, your soldiers. They all look the same. Now, I don't want to say generic. That's not fair.
Now, to give you some more ammo in your corner here, we already discussed how Kojima loves his film aspects of it. Yeah. I was going to refer to Ocelot getting his arm cut off in that spray as what I used to call the fire hose effect. It was in a lot of Japanese kung fu movies. Kill Bill, it was huge in that. It's
awesome.
Yeah, any time where you lose a limb and it just sprays out like wild, I call the fire hose effect, and that's straight from film. If you put yourself in an open world, you limit the narrative that you're going to be able to lead the player through.
Exactly.
And I think that shows.
Yeah, and okay, so let's take a scene from the first game that everybody and their mom remembers. Going in that hallway, seeing those corpses slap against the wall with Gray Fox invisible, going crazy.
Absolutely.
That is an unforgettable scene. That there's the word Kino, German for film. That is literally
it applies
one of the
here. It applies.
Incredible shots. Yeah, it's one of the most incredible shots I've seen in a video game, and it really shows that Kojima, loves his Western media. But when you play 5, not only are he really goes out with the camera effects and the lens flare. If you go back and replay that game, I want you to count how many lens flares you can see. But can you remember a visual area in Metal Gear Solid 5 as well as you can remember that scene in the hallway?
No, and that is exactly kind of what I was speaking to. The one thing that sticks out to me visually in Metal Gear Solid 5 is landing in the chopper, and that's because it's a scripted sequence where he's hanging out with his dog, you smoke your cigarette, and you jump out of the plane. But after that, you're pretty much on your own. Whereas if you give that hallway scene a hypothetical open world existence, what happens if you approached it, from the side and you just saw it wouldn't look good, if you came around the building and you heard Gray Fox in there going ape shit and you already knew before you got inside and you're like, oh, well, I guess I'll come back later. I got some more side missions to do before I want to deal with this. He'll keep going nuts for the next 2 weeks. It takes away a lot of its oomph.
I will point out a hypocritical argument that I'm making, but if you play the first game, first of all, you're in Alaska, so it's cold as hell. You're not switching areas that much. You're in a bunker, you're in another bunker, you're outside, you're in another bunker, you're fighting Metal Gear Rex, you're driving through a bunker, and then you're outside. Right. There's not too much to look at. And then you play Metal Gear Solid 2, you're on a boat, it all looks the same. You're in the big shell, it all looks the same. Now, granted, it looks fine, but it looks the same. And then you're in Arsenal gear, and holy crap, that's the best part of the game. It looks different. Things are going crazy. There's numbers on the screen. What's happening? Now, you play Metal Gear Solid 3, and this is my favorite, one of my favorite games of all time. You're in a jungle, yes. However, you also are in a science lab. You're in a weapons lab.
You're in the ruins of a warehouse. You're in old destroyed battlefields. You're in
a ravine.
Yes,
this huge
a cave
ravine.
system.
You're in a Western style fight with Ocelot.
Ugh.
You know, you've got the music playing, you've got literal tumbleweeds.
You
going
don't know it,
across,
but
and
you're
you
in a
see-
fucking bathysphere tube thing, asleep, walking up the river of the dead.
There are so many. You know, it's obviously one thematic area, but there are so many different ways to showcase an area and its environment. And 3 does a really good job at that. And you're on the base of a mountain, and then you climb up, and then it's snowy. That looks awesome. Then all of a sudden, you're in a rainforest, or you're in an area which kind of is like Seattle, California, with big trees and an over the top canopy. This is at the end of the game, where you're walking with Ava, where she's got the stick in her side.
Yeah, it took me a minute. I'm like, I don't remember that, but yeah, no, you're right. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then holy crap, dude. The field of flowers. I don't even have to say anything else. That's one of the best areas.
I got goosebumps straight up just thinking of the scene.
Yeah, same. Me too. No, but with 5, and this is just because this is not the area. I want to preface that because the world is beautiful. The desert on its own is one of my favorite environments to explore in a story in a video game. The sun, the sand, the colors.
They could have done so much more with that open world.
Yes. And, you drop into, I believe, Afghanistan. I believe that's the country you're in for the first half.
I think so.
The Middle East.
The generic Middle East.
Yeah. And I can't remember, the specific area that I can remember is like the ruins. Because it's like a landmark. Everything else is like, okay, it's the desert. There's a couple of rocks.
Yeah, there's some outposts here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, whatever. And then you go to Africa and you're like, okay, it's... the Sahara, there's grass and more trees, and
I guess I can put out some more traps.
There's a warehouse. It just doesn't blend together as well. And it sucks because you can do an open world game with like an interesting art style and have it be beautiful and breathtaking. Breath segueing into another game that is perfect to talk about. Well, Breath of the Wild.
Here we go. Yep.
Here's another one that might kill me. It's a mid-Zelda game. It's a good game. Mid-Zelda game. Only because it loses the things that I like the most about Zelda. But the world is beautiful. It's amazing to look at and go through. And, stuff repeats, but every area is distinct from another. I can remember the volcano as much as I can remember, walking into the Lost Woods for the first time. And if you do an open world game, if you don't have things stand out like that, like the ruins in Metal Gear Solid 5, you're going to lose it completely. And it just is going to blend in together to this one big mush. And it's such a shame that, so many games are going open world now.
Yeah.
And not that it's bad, but just like, you got to focus, man. You got to understand the art style.
So that's kind of my next pick of a game falls in between open world and kind of world based, and it's one that doesn't get a lot of love genre wise these days. Starting at, and it isn't a specific game, it is by a specific developer, and they kind of have a wide variety of releases all using this same kind of style, and they all progressed throughout their releases along at the same clip. We'll start with Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest.
Excellent choice.
All right, so it uses this strange pseudo 3D on a 2D plane, but they're not actually 3D models. Doesn't look like clay, but kind of does. If you've played these entries on the Super Nintendo, you immediately know what I'm talking about. Came out in November of '95 on RA, Diddy's Kong Quest, which, by the way, I wasn't until my early 20s before I realized that pun. So, yeah, felt bad about that one. 80 achievements at 830 points. So it's a very steep set. It will demand it out of you, though. Do not go in thinking that this is free points. Do not go in thinking that you're going to get a big 830 points for beating the game. That ain't going to happen. That being said, what drove me to these entries was their art. They had to make a transition to 3D in Donkey Kong 64, I believe it was called. I'm sorry, it shit the bed. It did. They had to ship that expansion pack out with it bundled in the game.
Yep.
And it still didn't even look good enough to visually qualify it for that. They quickly course corrected though as a studio. Rare, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day. All of these used that kind of constrained world, semi-cartoonish character mascot feel thing that they were going for, which just got better iterations as the sequels progressed. Concord wouldn't end up getting a sequel, but he did get that re-release, Live and Reloaded, on the Xbox years and years later.
Oh, bless his heart for that game.
It was a fun time. Banjo-Kazooie had several missteps in there, nuts and bolts we don't want to talk about at all. But kind of like I was tying into previously with some of our other entries, music is a part of the art direction. And I'll be damned if I don't have on my wall right now a Banjo-Kazooie record. Grant Kirkhope as the artist.
My man.
Yeah, fantastic music, still holds up. I would say the same thing for Donkey Kong. I have a Donkey Kong. There's a gentleman out there who is in the process of acquiring the actual synth hardware that Nintendo used.
Yes.
Yeah, at the time, and he recreates it 1-to-1. So it's legally allowed to be released, but it sounds like the best master version of these soundtracks, and just having those records spun on your home system is something to be enjoyed.
It's amazing.
Absolutely.
Now I got two things for you.
Go ahead.
One, you're gonna go crazy once I say it.
Oh no.
All right. I have a Diddy's Conquest
It's a
poster
fucking
on my
poster.
wall. Yes, I do. Now, when you were talking about the art style drawing you in, it drew me as a, that much in as a kid as well, because of how great it looks. And the key, I'm looking at the poster while I say this, the key is stylization.
Is this the one where he's looking into the chest and it has the dark behind him?
No, he is, I'm going to do my best to describe this. He is on a boat with Dixie, and he's looking off to the left, and below him is, a pirate, I forget the Croc's name, the whatever, but below him is like a skeleton pirate, and they're on a boat. And it looks, it's the official Nintendo power.
Oh,
poster.
okay. It should have a big blue like bruiser pirate on there.
That's it. Yeah, it looks fantastic. And all three games on the Super Nintendo, not only do they sound great, thank you, David Weiss, and I believe did Grant Kirkhope work on them?
I don't think he had involvement in this one, but it
might have just been David then. Well, they sound phenomenal, and aquatic ambience. Everyone's heard it once.
Absolutely.
In their life.
It's hard. Is it bad that I kind of hear your friend stuck in the barrel every now and then, like just every now and then in the background of aquatic ambience?
That's what we call brainworms.
There we
my
go.
Friend. They're deep in there, but the rendering is amazing. And this actually ties into concept art, which we talked about earlier. But when you get a render for a video game, you're allowed to go as much all out as you can. So, for instance, Mario 64, I cannot tell you how much I love those renders. They are absolutely beautiful and full of character. In fact, right next to the Diddy's Conquest poster is a poster, an official Nintendo Power one, of a render of Metal Mario in Hazy Maze Cave, looking off in the distance. And, because it's a computer-generated render and not, for a game, they can make it look as good as they want. But
I bet that Metal Mario looks great, though.
Oh, it looks fantastic. He's even got reflection. Oh, it's so good. But the Rare, what they did with their sprites was, it's a 1-to-1 to their renders. And it's beautifully done in a way that doesn't feel disgusting to look at. When you take a step back and you're like, if you're playing it on your TV and you look across the room and you squint your eyes, it looks like you're looking at a 3D model. That's how good these sprites are.
Absolutely. They hold up.
And it's so organic, too, the way they move and jump around. It doesn't feel like they're out of place. Sometimes it can look like they're overlaid, but that alone itself tells you that's how good they look. It's not like Symphony of the Night kind of blends in as one layer. This looks like it's layered like a puppet show. When
we had that little Nintendo leak there for a little bit, we got treated to some extreme high-res dumps.
Yes, we did.
And Diddy's Conquest was one of the games that did get a couple of scenes dumped from it, and my God, I don't know why they aren't, Nintendo, just embrace it and start charging people for a nice art book or something.
Seriously.
Because we love it.
Come on.
It's glorious stuff here.
And they keep all those assets, because if any of you listeners have ever played Super Smash Bros. Brawl, the stickers. All of those stickers are assets that they have, that they scan and put into that game. And they have Diddy's Conquest and all the other Donkey Kong Country and Mario 64. They have all those renders. They have all of them in high quality. You need to demand them. We need the art books.
Somewhere there is a stack of floppies next to an old Windows ME No, but
No, seriously.
yeah, I 100% agree. We're preaching to the choir on that front. I don't think anybody at Retro Achievements would not, fork over their bottom dollar for a Nintendo art
If they
book.
do.
Yeah. One of the things that I did want to talk about, though, with this art style is they kind of kept it going. Donkey Kong didn't get many more releases since, like, the mid-2010s. I believe Tropical Freeze was his last game. But
yeah, I think so.
minus Donkey Kong 64, all of them kept this kind of 3D, 2.5 kind of on a plane, let's just improve it style. And as such, you can drop into any of those entries and they're still going to be fun. They're still going to hold up visually. They're still going to control well because they didn't muddy themselves like, say, the platforming in Lara Croft's Tomb Raider. They didn't have to deal with any of these things because they knew what they were going for and they decided to do it well.
Agreed. Now, this is a perfect transition into my next game.
I'm just setting them up today.
I know, right? The people who did Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii, which, by the way, is a fantastic, beautiful game, completely just takes as much as it can from the Wii and slaps it into just an amazing, fun experience. The same people who did that game, Retro Studios, also did my next game.
Retro Studios is a fantastic department, or fantastic studio, just want to say.
Oh, yes, I love them. Now, this is controversial only because I know, because we're on a retro, server, a Retro Achievements website, that there are a lot of people who are going to think the entry 1 or 2 before this game is way better.
Uh-oh.
But Metroid Prime 2. Yeah. Now, I can explain.
Please do.
So, we talk about texturing and rendering and artwork. When you play, this is less on the game's individual, textures itself, but more so on its presentation of what it's giving you. So, let me just put you in the atmosphere. You're Samus, right? You're in your Varia suit, whatever. You drop down into this planet after your ship is destroyed. You open up, and you're in what appears to be an alien hive. It's yellow. There's cocoons everywhere. There's destroyed boxes. You eventually find corpses. The atmosphere of Metroid Prime 2 is unparalleled. No pun intended, because you go between worlds. But it is fantastic, and it's so damn good. And Retro Achievements is so good at presentation that if you, as Samus, in a first-person game, go up to a wall, charge your shot, and release, the glare from your charge beam shot, or whatever beam, reflects, and you see Samus's eyes in the visor on your screen. And if you move the camera, her eyes will move around. In that short second, you see her eyes.
I do remember that being a wow moment.
That is, I cannot tell you how insane that is.
As well as getting like the water droplets on the screen streaking down.
If you walk into Steam, the Steam hits your visor. When you play a game now, you might not take that stuff into account.
But at the time, it was certainly a wow moment. I will agree with you.
This is insane. Just the development for them to say, listen, we're first person, we want you to feel like you're Samus, no matter how much the controls feel different from the other games.
Now,
they've got glare for her eyes. That's crazy.
It is next level. It is next level. It's nuts. And something I want to... It's perfect now that you've brought up Metroid, because I was going to tie this in together. Sort of like Donkey Kong did while maintaining what they had and doing what they knew they did well. While there is another Prime entry being worked on, allegedly, it's being, I don't know how many goats have been sacrificed at the hill to try and bring this thing forth, but they're working on it. What was the Metroid Dread, returned to the Super Metroid form, returned to Zero Mission, returned to Fusion, returned to that 2D method that worked so well. And if you do a side-by-side comparison with Super Metroid, even though they are consoles and generations, decades apart, the movement that Samus jumps with, the speed at which she walks, these things all match up almost one-to-one with the Super Metroid counterpart. They knew that if they went back to basics, it would be a smash hit, and lo and behold, that game got a ton of love.
Yes, which thank God, because Metroid needs it. I love this series.
I'm glad to see it taken off of the shelf again.
And I know you might have groaned a little bit when I mentioned Prime 2. Mostly because I can understand why somebody would think this game is ugly, because of the muddiness.
Yeah,
With Metroid, I think it's the perfect opportunity to do weird. if this might sound strange, but because you're in an alien planet, you can go crazy with texturing.
Oh, it does check out. And same with sounds, thematics, aesthetic, all that stuff. You can really get out there, esoteric. Something that I love, and I can't think of a game specifically that does it, but I have played several that do. And if I was a game developer, especially in charge of sound, this would 100% be in there. If you're on an alien planet, just throw in a very strange and loud but distant sound, like an animal cry or something, just colossal sized, but very off in the distant, and have your player go, "What the fuck was that?" Like they're gonna feel that.
Exactly. Have you played Subnautica before?
Oh, Jesus, there's a perfect example. Holy shit.
Yeah, honestly, that's the best and worst thing ever, because
I literally clenched in my chair, man. Like that game wigs me out.
And it's the innate human nature that we have to fear large spaces where we are not good at moving around in. Water is one of those, because you're not
out of your element.
To swim in open water. Yeah. And so if you're sitting there in this alien environment, just going around scanning your fish, and you hear a roar, oh my God. You better book it. That Reaper Leviathan is right behind you.
Absolutely. It's, I don't know. We could go on about art direction for hours. It's one of those things, like I started the show off by saying it was subjective. Anybody could come on this show and say what game holds up in their eyes, art direction style, music style, writing style. It's one of those things that, like I said, if you find something that stands the test of time, anybody can agree on it, a la Symphony of the Night, a la Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But some people out there are screaming right now that we said that Silent Hill 2 doesn't hold up. Some people are screaming into their monitors, "What do you mean when James looks into the mirror and pushes on his face? That's perfect."
Okay, I will say that scene does look really good.
and some would argue, maybe that hypothetical person who's screaming at the screen, that is exactly where the Uncanny Valley would do Silent Hill 2 a great service. Yep. It's just something that, a lovely topic to have, and we could go on about it for hours. That being said, we do got to start wrapping it up, unfortunately. It's been a while. I do want to touch on just a general question before we do send off. Have you seen any sets come out recently, or anything in note that you want to draw attention to? What's caught your attention out there?
Well, it hasn't come out yet, but I'm actually working on it, if you allow me to plug a little bit.
Self-plug.
Dragon Quest V.
All right.
It has a port on the PlayStation 2 that I never knew about, and I've talked about Dragon Quest in the past, but this is just an adorable little port. And, Dragon Quest V is on the Super Nintendo.
So still in the top-down days.
Sprite work. Yeah, it's an amazing game with amazing sprite work. They translated it pretty well into the PS2 with these cute little models. It's just something that if you're a Dragon Quest fan and you already played 5, I think you should check it out once I get the set out, because I think it does a good job at representing a 16-bit game brought to life on the PS2. Now that we've got it on the site, it's a perfect time to show both the game and what they could do with this system.
Sure. No, I mean, and we're going to be looking forward to it. We definitely know that you're starting to become the in-house Dragon Quest guy. Definitely making a name for yourself, and this will help carve that niche out even further. Alongside getting voted, like we said, best dev of 2022, there's lots to look forward to.
Thank you. And you were just voted in as the best host, the best voice.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's many contenders in that one right now, but yeah, I'll take it. Thank you. For me, that set that just come out that I kind of want to draw attention to would be sort of in the realm of what we were talking about. Now, it doesn't hold up. It looks like dog shit. It controls like dog shit. But the reason that I do bring it up is, going into it, the developer was so big dick proud. And I'm using these crude terms because the game I'm talking about is Daikatana.
Oh yes, let's go.
Yeah, John Romero's Daikatana on the N64. This is the ad. It was literally, "John Romero will make you his bitch." That was the full page ad in the magazine for it, because he thought that he was gonna really be bringing the fucking heat with this release. Slash Tangent just came out with a set for it at 21 achievements, 106 points. Remember, Slash didn't make the art style, guys. Slash didn't design the game mechanics.
No.
He just suffered through the memory to put some achievements to it. Go check it out. Give it a look. And this is exactly this is the perfect example of what we just described in an antithesis form. If you strive for some kind of realism, it is a fantasy realism, but they were definitely going for realism at the time. He wanted those models to look good and gory and realistic death. And now you look back at it and you're like, this is some Duke Nukem knockoff shit. I don't know.
Is the goofiest.
Yes.
Goofiest of goof.
Yeah, so
I mean, yeah.
That's just something, like I said, don't hold it against Slash. He didn't design that art style, but it is something that came out recently within the last couple of months that I saw get released, and it gave me a chuckle.
And super popular too. I see a lot of people playing it, enjoying it, even though, like, good God, how can you?
A lot of
enjoy
people's.
that? I mean, the set looks fine, but playing
please,
it, oh my
a lot
gosh.
of people self-inflicting pain. I don't know if they're enjoying it.
I think that might be a staple for retro achievements.
Soon we'll see that's the case. But guys, this has been TimeCrush, Galloway's Retro Achievements Podcast. Feel free to write in retroachievementspodcast@gmail.com. We do like to read off some listener mail. Always exciting when those hit the inbox. We have some more topics coming down the line. If you're interested in being a guest, let me know what you'd like to talk about. Give me an example of something you think you'd be passionate to go off, and I'd be happy to have you on. That being said, glad to have you folks, and we will see you next time.